that you ultimately arrive upon are implemented in a fashion that don't cause more problems for us.
Yeah. We're also going to have a dynamic we haven't had here in New Jersey in a while with a governor and legislature of different parties, as we had 8 years of Democrats controlling everything, 8 years of Republicans. Do you think that's a good thing that we have that kind of check and balance?
You know,
there?
I think in life balance is good.
Yeah.
I think that you know, it's unfortunate whether it was the years that there were both Republicans in the White House and in the Congress, or the years of Democrats in our legislature and in the governor's office, that more was not accomplished. And I think the same is true in other times in New Jersey history where the same parties have been in power in both of those two branches. Mm-hmm. And I, as a citizen and as an observer, I've been frustrated when those opportunities are squandered. That being said, I think that with balance comes moderation, more thoughtfulness, and like I said, in life I think balance is a good thing, and I think in government it's a good thing. So if compromises can be forged, where fundamental principles are not compromised, at least by my party, I think it's a good thing, and something I would encourage. I think we've heard the leaders of both houses of our legislature speak in those terms.
Right.
I think we've heard the governor-elect speak in those terms, and I think he has the capacity to forge not only relationships but compromises, and I'm hoping the best for him as a citizen, as I'm sure a lot of people in our state are. We want to see things resolved that need to be resolved.
Mm-hmm.
If you were asked to put together a public policy agenda for the new governor and the new legislature, what would be the 4 or 5 issues that you would put on top of the agenda?
You know, it almost sounds cliche-like, but I genuinely believe the concept of home rule and the consequences that flow from it are at the core of many of our problems in our state. And I hearken back to Alan Karcher's prescient view of things in that wonderful book that he wrote. And he pretty much gave us a roadmap to the looming disaster that we're facing. And when I talk about the consequences that flow from it, the many policy consequences that flow from our insistence that we be in these 600 school districts, or we be in these 570 municipalities, the consequences are legion in so many ways. I mean, our whole education system is driven by the creation of separate districts and the haves and the have-nots, and where our money flows and should flow, and the quality of education. Our law enforcement, you know, the dollars available for quality law enforcement in urban centers pales in comparison to what's available in the suburbs, yet the need is in our urban centers where there's a higher consolidation of populations. Our looming healthcare crisis, we see hospitals closing, but many of them are in our urban centers. There's a void and vacuum that is being created by adequate health care for the poor, which are centralized there. You know, apartheid is a strong word, and I don't mean it necessarily in a racial sense, but home rule has created its own form of apartheid, of social and economic and even race issues in our state. And you see it manifest, in my view, in even this election, where, you know, people are running from the problems. You know, they'll run from city to suburb. They'll run from suburb to the farthest west county or the farthest southern county. They'll run from New Jersey to Pennsylvania, or they'll run from Pennsylvania to Florida to avoid property taxes. And property taxes is nothing more than the cost of the priorities that our government set for what the role of government will be and how we'll pay for them. And the problem is, it transcends. You can't run away from these problems. And home rule, I think, fosters this misapprehension that you can by living in an enclave that avoids them. Not to wax too philosophical, but, you know, it's the same issue that faces our nation. You know, whether it's dumbing down of a fair wage, you know, and why we complain in this country about wages and the economic gap between the rich and the poor expanding is a function of the fact that you can get things done on a lot cheaper basis in other parts of the world. Well, same principle applies. Is, you know, you can pay a cop a lot cheaper in central Pennsylvania or in Dakota. Therefore, your property taxes are going to be less.
Right.
And so I'm not sure I answered it as a 6 things, Mike, but I think that if I had identified the single most important policy issue in our state is our grappling with the notion of how we govern ourselves, in what forums we govern ourselves, in what entities we govern ourselves, and how we're going to pay for the services and priorities that we set, and addressing the duplication of so many services that are unnecessary.
Now, you've dealt with the issue of, and we have too, at the whole Institute, the issue of pension reform. Is there any solution, or at least a way of ameliorating the current pension situation that we have?
Well, we're obviously in a hole, and I guess the starting point is that we all hope the economy turns around and that the investment returns of the pension fund are going to supplement or at least begin to build back the base that's required. But I think your question really goes to the long-term implications of the current systems we have, and those systems are essentially, we have hundreds of thousands, I think the last number I read was 700,000 people in our state that are beneficiaries of our post-retirement pension plan and defined benefit plans. Governor Corzine attempted, I think with a modicum of success, to deal with the problem head-on in collective bargaining. We made some modest progress that I personally am proud of and professionally proud of, by returning back to the retirement eligibility age that existed at the time that Governor DeFrancesco rolled that back by legislation that he introduced. So Governor Corzine brought it to the age of 62 from the age of 55. A dramatic and significant change, which will only be realized down the road in terms of cost. Increasing employee contributions was another result of his bargaining. But the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and one I think we'll see dealt with with Governor Christie, is whether or not you can resolve these things by collective bargaining, and whether or not that's the forum to deal with it, and whether or not labor will have come, and its leadership will have come to recognize that it can't continue like this, and that it's in their interest that maybe it needs to be changed prospectively to preserve what has been gained over the last 2 or 3 decades with the defined benefit plan. So I think that the law in this state allows for changes legislatively, and you don't have to resort to collective bargaining. And for those that are in organized labor, what I'm saying would be of great concern to them, because they believe that it is appropriately a subject for bargaining. If it can't be addressed in bargaining in a way that's satisfactory to the common good, then it may have to resort to be dealt with in a legislative context, and that's an invitation to war, because public employees will feel very strongly about their collectively bargained for rights, and the fact that these are matters that should be collectively bargained. And our legislature and our governor will be tested with whether or not they will want to pursue legislative changes by adopting laws that say we will no longer have a pension plan, a defined benefit plan, we'll have a 401k type plan if we have pension benefits at all, or we will no longer have post-employment retirement benefits. And then I think the government will have to ask itself, as a matter of policy and as an employer, well, if you don't provide those benefits, who do you recruit? Is this just a reaction to the economy we have now? Yes, the private sector is retracting and retreating from those kinds of benefits, but will they be revisited when the economy and the workforce is more competitive and there's a need for people? You know, so there's an ebb and flow to this, and it goes back, Richard and Michael, to what I said before, is obviously there's a great potential for knee-jerk reactions to these problems. Our state is swimming in debt. We have an $8 billion budget deficit. We are on the verge of fiscal calamity. What do you do in that situation? In the private sector, you go into bankruptcy and you discharge your collective bargaining agreements and you unilaterally impose terms and conditions, if the law allows you to do that. You know, that paradigm could work in the short term in the public sector, but does it work in the long term? And let's be mindful of the fact that you have career public workers who've invested their lives foregoing potentially other opportunities that existed in anticipation of the kinds of returns that come with public employment, security, and the like. But like I said before, it all comes down to balance. We are out of balance. There is a middle place that has to be found, one where all the stakeholders have to understand that they have to give. I think labor needs to understand it's time to give more than it has given, although it is would probably not like to hear those words, but I think from their perspective it's a matter of survival because they have a lot at risk by way of collective bargaining. Same token, I think government has to understand that wholesale layoffs of employees only increases our unemployment population, diminishes the services that are